the world's richest man once had to borrow money to pay rent. While you're watching this video, Elon Musk owns a fortune that exceeds the GDP of entire countries. His Tesla company is worth more than Toyota, Volkswagen, and Ford combined. His SpaceX rockets transport astronauts to the International Space Station. He literally changed 3 different industries simultaneously: automotive, aerospace, and energy. But in 2008, this same man was completely broke, sleeping on the cold factory floor of Tesla, living exclusively off loans from friends just to keep a roof over his head and not end up living on the streets like any homeless person. What the hell happened between these 2 extreme moments of his life? How is it possible for someone to go from the brink of total bankruptcy, borrowing money for basic necessities like housing, to becoming the most influential and visionary CEO on the entire planet? The answer will leave you completely shocked, because this transformation didn't start in 2008, not when he sold PayPal, not when he arrived in Silicon Valley. It all started much, much earlier. It all started with a severely traumatized boy growing up in the violent and racist South Africa of the 1980s, suffering daily abuse that almost destroyed his mind, but ended up forging the obsessive and relentless character we know today. If you want to discover the whole truth behind the construction of the Musk empire, if you want to understand the brutal sacrifices he made and how you can apply these lessons to your own life, subscribe to the channel right now and hit that notification bell, because this story will completely change your perspective on what success really means and the price you pay for it. I guarantee that in the next 20 minutes you'll discover things about Elon Musk that not even his biggest fans know. Pretoria, South Africa, June 28, 1971. While the entire world lived under the constant tension of the Cold War, with the United States and Soviet Union threatening to destroy each other with nuclear weapons, Elon Reeve Musk was born in a country completely divided and devastated by the brutal apartheid system. But the real war that Elon would face in the coming years of his life wouldn't be against oppressive political systems or international tensions. The most brutal and traumatic war of his life would be fought inside his own home, against his own father, a man he would describe decades later as an absolutely terrible human being. Elon Musk. This name you've probably never heard of in your life, but it was exactly this man who shaped, through deep and systematic psychological trauma, the obsessive, workaholic, and emotionally armored personality we know today. Errol was an electromechanical engineer, airplane pilot, emerald mine owner, a theoretically successful man professionally, but who, according to Elon's own reports and everyone who lived with him, was completely toxic, abusive, and destructive in his personal relationships, especially with his own children. Elon was only 8 years old when his parents finally divorced, after years of a completely dysfunctional marriage, full of constant screaming, violent arguments, and a domestic environment that looked more like an emotional battlefield than a home. And then, in a decision he would later call completely stupid and would regret for the rest of his life, little Elon chose to go live with his father instead of his mother. Why? Because in the mind of an 8-year-old child, he felt sorry for his father, thought Errol would be alone and sad, and believed he could somehow help improve the situation. What he found was hell on earth. Elon Musk's house was a place where screaming was completely normal, where psychological humiliation was daily routine, where an extremely intelligent and sensitive child was constantly diminished, criticized, and emotionally destroyed every single day. Errol had the sadistic habit of giving endless sermons to Elon, sessions of 3 to 4 consecutive hours where he systematically destroyed his son's self-esteem, criticized every aspect of the boy's personality, called him useless, lazy, a failure, and basically planted deep seeds of inadequacy and insecurity in the mind of one of the future most important people in human history. Now imagine what it must be like for the mind of an extremely gifted child, fascinated by computers at a time when practically no one in the world had a personal computer at home, a child who devoured science fiction books and dreamed of exploring space, having to live daily with someone who systematically tried to convince him that he was human garbage. At 9 years old, Elon was already programming computers alone, learning complex programming languages just by reading dense technical manuals. At 12, he created and sold his first video game called Blaster for $500, a significant amount for a child in the 80s. But when he got home, he wasn't a technology prodigy, he was just another target for constant paternal toxicity. Psychologists specializing in childhood trauma explain that when an exceptionally intelligent and creative child faces this type of systematic emotional abuse, usually one of 2 things happens. Either the child breaks completely, develops depression, anxiety, and a series of mental problems that haunt them for the rest of their lives, or they develop a kind of almost impenetrable emotional armor, a superhuman ability to ignore criticism, to persevere in the face of impossible obstacles, and to work obsessively to prove that everyone who doubted them was wrong. Elon clearly chose the second option, but as we'll see, every emotional armor comes with a very high price. And then, as if the situation at home wasn't traumatic enough, came school, where things managed to get even much worse. Waterkloof House Preparatory School. For most middle-class South African children, it would just be another decent private school where they would receive a solid education and make lifelong friends. For Elon Musk, it was literally a daily battlefield where he fought for physical and emotional survival. Let's paint the complete picture here. Elon at 16 years old, 6 feet 3 inches tall, but skinny as a toothpick, probably weighing about 130 pounds soaking wet. He wore thick glasses because he had severe myopia, was completely introverted and socially awkward, lived with his nose literally buried in physics, mathematics and science fiction books. He read obsessively, up to 10 hours a day of reading, devoured entire encyclopedias from cover to cover, memorized technical details about rockets, quantum physics and computer programming. In a school where playing rugby was practically a religion, where masculinity was measured by the ability to give and take hits on the field, Elon preferred to discuss the laws of thermodynamics or the latest advances in artificial intelligence. Obviously, he became a perfect target for systematic and extremely violent bullying. But we're not talking about silly playground jokes or mean nicknames. We're talking about brutal physical assaults, regular beatings, constant public humiliation. The most traumatic episode happened when Elon was about 15. A group of boys literally surrounded him, threw him down a flight of stairs with full force, and then went down and continued beating him while he was lying on the ground, defenseless. He was hospitalized, spent an entire week unable to breathe properly because of bruised ribs and a broken nose, and had to be operated on to reconstruct his nasal septum. But here's the most impressive and revealing part of this entire trauma story. Years later, as an adult, in several interviews, Elon said that terrible period at school was absolutely fundamental in shaping who he became. He literally said, "I learned that if you don't fight for what you believe in, if you're not willing to face adversity and persevere when everyone is against you, there will always be someone ready to knock you down. The world has no pity for weak people." This war mentality, this ability to keep fighting when any normal person would give up, was forged during those brutal school years in South Africa. Psychologists specializing in human development call this phenomenon transformative trauma. It's when a person, especially during childhood and adolescence, faces adversity so severe that they literally reprogram the person's mental and emotional structure. Instead of breaking, the mind develops an abnormal resistance to pain, failure, criticism. The person becomes almost addicted to overcoming impossible obstacles, because that's exactly what kept them alive during the formative years. Elon clearly developed this psychological armor, but like all armor, it protects from the outside but also isolates from the inside. 1989 17-year-old Elon Musk makes the riskiest and most courageous decision of his life so far. Completely abandon everything he knew in South Africa and leave alone for Canada, a country where he knew absolutely no one, had no connections, no guaranteed job, and most importantly, no money. How much money exactly did he leave South Africa with? $2,000. That's right, only $2,000 to start an entire life from scratch in a completely foreign country. Why Canada? Simple. His mother, May Musk, was born in Canada, so he got Canadian citizenship, and in his mind, Canada would be the gateway to the real destination he had in mind, the United States of America, specifically Silicon Valley, which was already beginning to buzz with the technological revolution of personal computers and the nascent internet. The first months in Canada were absolutely brutal. He arrived in the middle of Canadian winter, completely unprepared for temperatures of -4 degrees Fahrenheit, sleeping in cheap hostels that cost $15 a night, but even that was devouring his microscopic financial reserves quickly. When the hostel money ran out, he literally slept outdoors on park benches in train stations, wherever he could find minimal shelter from the freezing cold. To survive, he accepted any manual labor job that came along. He worked on a farm cleaning industrial boilers, a dirty, dangerous and physically exhausting job that paid only $18 a day. $18 a day for someone who today is worth more than $200 billion. He literally went hungry regularly, lost 29 pounds in his first year in Canada because he often didn't have money even to buy basic food. He survived on cheap sandwiches, instant noodles, and anything he could find for free. But here's the fundamental difference between Elon Musk and 99% of people who face this type of adversity. While he cleaned dirty, stinking boilers in the morning, earning a pittance and physically destroying his own body, he studied advanced physics and economics at night. While other poor immigrants complained about the hard life or sank into depression and self-pity, he devoured books about sustainable energy, space exploration, artificial intelligence, emerging market economics. He literally turned the local public library into his personal office, spending every evening there studying until the library closed. He got a scholarship to Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, where he finally began to have a somewhat more stable life. But even at university he wasn't a normal student. While other freshmen worried about parties, relationships and typical college fun, Elon studied obsessively, got excellent grades, and was already planning the next steps of his journey. After 2 years at Queen's, he got a transfer to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States, where he graduated with 2 simultaneous degrees, physics and economics from Wharton, one of the world's most prestigious business schools. But in his mind there was only one possible destination, one place where he knew he could turn his crazy ideas about humanity's future into reality. Silicon Valley, California, the absolute epicenter of the technological revolution of the 90s. 1995 Stanford University accepts Elon Musk for a PhD in applied physics, focused on developing ultrasonic capacitors for use in electric vehicles. Any normal person would be ecstatic about this opportunity. Stanford was one of the most prestigious universities in the world. The PhD would guarantee a brilliant academic career, financial stability, intellectual recognition. You know what Elon did? He dropped out in exactly 2 days. 2 days? What? Because the internet was literally exploding, the World Wide Web revolution was happening in real time right in front of his eyes, and he knew that if he stayed locked in a laboratory room for 4 years doing academic research, he would completely miss the greatest technological opportunity in human history. In 1995, having a website was considered something for crazy nerds. Most companies didn't even know what the internet was. E-commerce was science fiction. But Elon, with his supernatural ability to see the future before everyone else, realized that the internet would change absolutely everything. How people communicate, how they do business, how they consume information, how they relate. And he wanted to be at the center of this revolution. Together with his brother Kimball, he founded Zip2, a company that created online city guides for newspapers. It seems like an obvious idea today, but in 1995 it was revolutionary. The proposal was simple. Instead of looking for restaurants, stores and services in printed yellow pages, you could find everything online with maps, reviews, detailed information. Today this is trivial, but in 1995 it was pure science fiction. But creating a technology startup without money, without connections, without business experience, is one of the hardest things in the world. Elon literally lived in the company office. He had no apartment, no house, slept in a sleeping bag under the office desk. He showered at the local gym, which cost $10 a month. He worked 100 hours a week, 7 days a week, no vacation, no rest, no social life. He ate cold pizza for breakfast, lunch and dinner. His only obsession was making Zip2 work. And it worked. In 1999, Compaq Computer Corporation bought Zip2 for $307 million. Elon's share? $22 million. At 28 years old, he was officially a multimillionaire. Most people in this situation would buy a mansion, a yacht, luxury cars, travel the world, enjoy life. Elon bought only a modest apartment and a McLaren F1, which he completely destroyed in an accident a few weeks later for not having insurance. But here we begin to see the psychological pattern that would define Elon Musk's entire career. He never stops, never gets satisfied, never settles for current success. $22 million? For him it was just fuel for the next even more ambitious project. He immediately invested practically everything in a new even riskier company, X.com, a digital bank that you know today as PayPal. The X.com idea was completely crazy by 1999 standards. A completely online bank without physical branches, where you could transfer money through email, make electronic payments, manage your finances entirely over the internet. Traditional banks laughed at the idea. Government regulators tried to stop it. Investors thought it was impossible. But Elon knew he was right. He again dove obsessively into the project, working days and nights without stopping, sleeping in the office, living exclusively to make X.com work. But this time there was a complication: direct competition. A company called Confinity, led by Peter Thiel and a young programmer named Max Levchin, was developing exactly the same type of service, with specific focus on online payments for eBay, which was growing explosively. The war between X.com and Confinity was brutal. Both companies burned millions of dollars trying to acquire users, offering cash bonuses for each new account created, spending fortunes on aggressive marketing, hiring the best engineers for astronomical salaries. It was literally a race to see who could dominate the digital payments market first. In March 2000, realizing that the war was financially destroying both companies, Elon and Peter Thiel made the strategic decision to merge the companies. Elon's X.com absorbed Confinity, initially keeping Elon as CEO of the combined company. But here began one of the most dramatic and traumatic chapters of Elon's career, a brutal internal political war that resulted in his removal from the very company he had created. Peter Thiel and other executives literally organized a corporate coup against Elon. While he was on a 2-week honeymoon, the conspirators convinced the board of directors that Elon didn't have enough experience to lead a financial payments company, that his technical decisions were delaying development, that he was being too risky with investors' money. When Elon returned from his honeymoon, he discovered he had been fired from his own company. Imagine the psychological humiliation, being expelled from the company you created by the very partners you brought in to help with growth. For someone with the history of trauma and abandonment that Elon carried since childhood, this was devastating. But once again, instead of letting himself be broken by adversity, he channeled the pain into fuel for the next projects. The company changed its name to PayPal and continued growing explosively. In 2002, eBay bought PayPal for $1.5 billion. Even having been removed from leadership, Elon was still the largest individual shareholder of the company. His share of the sale? $180 million. At 31 years old, he had $180 million in the bank. He could retire completely, buy islands in the Caribbean, live off interest for the rest of his life, make safe and conservative investments like 99% of multimillionaires do. But Elon Musk is not 99% of people. Instead of enjoying the fortune or making low-risk investments, he made the most insane and risky decision possible. Invest literally everything in 3 simultaneous companies, each trying to revolutionize completely different industries and all considered impossible by experts. SpaceX to revolutionize space exploration, Tesla Motors to revolutionize the automotive industry, and SolarCity to revolutionize solar energy. $3 trillion industries, 3 markets dominated by giants established for decades, 3 sectors where small startups traditionally go to die. And here, folks, is where our story really starts to get interesting, because investing everything means literally everything. And when you invest every penny you own in highly risky and experimental projects, you can end up losing absolutely everything and literally being left without money for basic necessities like housing and food. Let me explain how the situation hit rock bottom. In 2008, the entire world was facing the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression of 1929. Giant banks like Lehman Brothers collapsed overnight. Billionaires lost entire fortunes. Stock markets plummeted. Credit completely evaporated. Investors stopped financing risky startups. And right in the middle of this apocalyptic economic storm, Elon Musk was living his own personal hell with his 3 companies simultaneously on the brink of total collapse. SpaceX. The first 3 rocket launches failed spectacularly. Each rocket cost between $60 and $80 million to build, and all 3 literally exploded, taking millions of dollars in investments with them. NASA was losing confidence. Investors were fleeing in panic. The company was technically bankrupt, without money to attempt a 4th launch. Tesla Motors. Production of the Tesla Roadster, the company's first commercial electric car, was delayed by more than a year. Production costs were exploding completely out of control. Each car the company managed to produce cost more than $100,000 to manufacture, but was sold for only $109,000, generating loss on each unit sold. Suppliers were canceling contracts. Employees were being laid off en masse. First-tier investors like Daimler were threatening to pull all funding. SolarCity. The solar energy market was in total collapse because of the economic crisis. Credit for financing residential solar panels had simply evaporated. Sales plummeted. The company was burning money without sufficient revenue to cover basic operations. And here's the part that few know, the most shocking part of this entire story. Elon Musk was personally completely broke. He had invested every penny of his personal fortune of $180 million in the 3 companies. He had no personal financial reserves, no diversified investments, no passive income. When the company started to fail, he started to fail with them. The situation reached the point where Elon literally didn't have money to pay rent on his own house. A man who 2 years earlier was worth almost $200 million was asking for personal loans of $20,000–$30,000 from close friends just to keep a roof over his head and not end up living on the street like a homeless person. He sold personal possessions to get money for basic necessities. He canceled health plans. He stopped paying non-essential bills. But the most dramatic part is that even in this desperate situation, Elon continued sleeping literally on the floor of the Tesla factory in Fremont, California. He had no house, no apartment, lived like a homeless person inside his own factory. He ate cheap sandwiches and cold coffee. He showered in the employee locker rooms. He wore the same clothes for several days in a row. Close friends report that he cried from stress and exhaustion, lost 48 pounds in 6 months because of the combination of poor nutrition, lack of sleep and extreme psychological pressure. Imagine the mental situation. You've been a multimillionaire, you've revolutionized an entire industry, you've proven that your ideas work, and now you're literally asking to borrow $20,000 from a friend just to not be homeless, while sleeping on the floor of a factory like a homeless worker. Most normal people in this situation would give up completely, look for a well-paid executive job at a traditional company, accept defeat and try to rebuild life in a more conservative and safe way. Elon did exactly the opposite. He doubled down. Instead of giving up, he started working even more obsessively, reaching the point of literally working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. Instead of accepting offers to sell the companies for any price and recover at least part of the investment, he continued investing every last penny he could borrow or raise from investors. Instead of diversifying and reducing risks, he concentrated all his energy and remaining resources on an all-or-nothing strategy. The situation reached absolute limit in September 2008. SpaceX had money for exactly one more launch attempt. If the fourth rocket failed like the previous 3, the company would close definitively. Tesla was days away from declaring official bankruptcy. Elon was personally out of money, living on loans with no prospect of where he would get resources to continue operating. And then the miracle happened. SpaceX's fourth launch worked perfectly. The Falcon 1 rocket not only took off successfully, but put a satellite in orbit exactly as planned. Immediately, NASA offered a contract of $1,600,000,000 for SpaceX to transport cargo to the International Space Station. From rock bottom to $1 billion contract in a matter of hours. At the same time, Tesla managed to attract last-minute investments from Daimler, which bought a $50 million stake in the company, followed by a government loan of $465 million from the U.S. Department of Energy. Suddenly, the company that was days away from bankruptcy had sufficient resources to finalize development and start mass production of the Model S. SolarCity also managed to restructure operations and attract new investments focused on the commercial and industrial market instead of residential, completely changing the business model and returning to sustainable growth. In 2010, Tesla went public on the stock exchange, raising $226 million in the initial public offering. In 2012, SpaceX performed the first successful commercial flight to the International Space Station, definitively proving that a private company could compete with and surpass government space agencies. In 2020, Tesla became the world's most valuable automotive company, worth more than Toyota, Volkswagen, Ford and General Motors combined. From borrowing money to pay rent to the world's richest man. From the factory floor to the most influential person in the automotive and aerospace industry. But this isn't really a story about money or financial success. This is a story about a brutal truth that most people don't want to accept. Great achievements require great sacrifices, and the price of extraordinary success is almost always extraordinary suffering. Elon Musk didn't succeed despite the childhood traumas, the bullying at school, the business failures, the personal financial crises. He succeeded exactly because of these brutal experiences. Bullying taught unbreakable perseverance. The toxic father taught total emotional independence. Bankruptcy taught that you only really lose when you give up completely. Suffering built an abnormal tolerance to pain that allows continuing to work when any normal person would stop. The most important lesson of this entire saga isn't that you need to be a genius or have revolutionary ideas to succeed. The lesson is that you need to be willing to sacrifice absolutely everything for what you believe in. You need to have the capacity to keep fighting when everyone around you is saying you're crazy. You need to transform failure and rejection into fuel instead of excuses. If this story inspired you in any way, if it made you rethink your own limitations and excuses, subscribe to the channel, hit that like button down below, and comment what your biggest dream or project is that you're postponing out of fear of failure. Because maybe, just maybe, you're closer to achieving your goals than you imagine, and the only thing missing is the courage to bet everything on yourself. See you in the next video, and always remember, failure is just a temporary station on the journey, never the final destination. The only way to really lose is to give up before getting there.